Okay, if this theme song resembles anything you've heard before, that's wrong and it's all in your head. Showy, yo, 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 showy, yo, 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 runner, show.
Wow.
Bravo.
Bravo.
You can't sue me. I can't be sued because I told you I made that up.
Welcome to the Showrunner Show, where every week we demystify some aspect of the job of showrunning for anyone who works in TV, who wants to work in TV, or just wants to know how it's all made. This week, we're continuing our conversation about the 5 primary functions of your pilot script and how to navigate through those different Cs.
Okay, as a reminder, those 5 functions that the pilot script serves are, number 1, it's a sales tool to help you sell your show. Number 2, it's a proof of concept for the network to decide whether to order more scripts or even to greenlight your show. Okay, we covered those 2 topics last week. Now, this week we're going to talk about function number 3. It is a lure, hopefully, for actors. Function number 4, it's a blueprint for pre-production to unify your crews and build a show around. And function number 5 of your pilot script, it is a shootable battle plan. That's the final step. It's a shootable battle plan.
So yeah, let's talk about, script number 3. So the script function number 3 is the actor lure, like something, before sending your script out to an actor. Let's say, you hear this actor is looking to do something like this and you're excited, you're going to send him a script. You may write a cover letter. But one thing I'd recommend is read the script down through the eyes of that actor. You know what I mean? Like if, I've heard everything from scene the description of the character. We had a friend who was a director who was trying to get an actor to do her movie, and she gave him a script and he read it and he's like, it's not for me. And she looked back over the script and she's like, the description was the character is like, he old and doughy, or something like that. And she was like, how about we just change that to, his age doesn't mask the fact that he was an athlete, in his younger years, and they changed just that one thing, gave it back to the actor. And he's like, oh man, what the changes are amazing. Okay, I'll do it. And, sometimes it's that simple, but it's worth looking at. Why would this actor want to do this project?
Yeah. And this is critical. And, you do to that example you just mentioned, John, you don't often get a second chance to make changes and send it back to an actor. That almost never happens. So you have to assume that this is the one read you'll ever get. But we've had, scripts where that character's amazing. Of course they're going to love it. And we send it and then kind of too late read back down, those small details in the descriptions and some of the action where you're just oh yeah, I get why, the actor kind of tripped on this. It's you think in your head it's a great character because you know what you're imagining, but it's those little details. It's really worth going through, and doing a specific pass just for that actor, just for casting that actor. And that does not need to be big changes. It's changes like you mentioned, just the way you describe the character, the way you describe his or her, not just physical description, but, the action too. We had, a character who we might have been playing was too kind of nervous or almost having a panic attack in the scene. And we're like, okay, that's not what we really meant, but that's how they read it. And they weren't wrong, but we want it to be, just more tense, not the actors, the characters,
trembling mess.
Yeah. Trembling mess. Exactly. It's just turns of phrase that could be slightly different and can make a huge difference.
In your experience, what percentage of actors want their characters to be noble, impressive, attractive, and what percentage of your actors kind of lean into that? For me, when I was an actor, I always loved, nothing made me happier than looking ugly, being a hot mess, And I remember, you had an actor, there was a description in Joe Pickett where it said, so-and-so, parentheses, a mustache you'd love to punch, or a mustache you want to punch, something like that. And the actor's wife read it and was like, this is a perfect role for you. So what do you think the percentage? I feel like there's a small percentage that want to be sort of yucky or character or down and dirty or funny, usually comedy or character actors. And then there are people who are like, no, I don't want to be old and wrinkly. I want to be, a lion in winter or a former athlete. Or for example, I've got one now with a script that, again, it's on pause because of the strike, but I described the character as a muffin top skank. And I thought, oh my God, that's the best thing I've ever heard. Like, I would kill to play a muffin top skank. That's amazing. But I think I might be in the minority. I think the vast majority of actors would be like, muffin top skank, pass. What's your opinion about that? Throw out a number for me.
Well, I think it almost helps to maybe delineate between your lead actors and then everyone else. And I think, to your point about a muffin top skank might be awesome for like a more supporting role that you're going a little more character with, but usually who you're attaching early is your leads, and one or two kind of leads, and I'd say for them a very small percentage want to be lean into being super ugly or super weak or super drug addicted or something. I think they often want to, usually it's someone that has a bit of a brand of what they've done in their career and want to kind of continue what they're doing well. So I think but I think for supporting and and down, I think a high percentage want to do like the really fun, crazy.
Okay, so it's sort of like top 10 on your call sheet, appealing, and then once you get to number 11, it's just like a limp, an eye patch, and muffin top skank.
A perfect science, but what do you think, John? What
that sounds about right. Yeah, I'd say the top 5. The 5 leads of the show probably want to be appealing, you know what I mean, in some way, and and then it's hard to break through. It's hard to break through if you only have like 5 lines in a thing, unless you're doing something kind of crazy or noticeable. So I'd say once that sounds about right. And also I would say too, in the script, an actor, may not know you, probably doesn't know you, is reading the script and asking themselves, like, am I safe? Is this a safe environment for me to engage in? And if the writing sounds like the writers hate the character or dislike the character or look down on or disparage the character in some way, like they may look at this and be like, I don't want to be in this environment. Like, I want to do something. I'm with good partners, I'm protected, the writers, even if the character, Breaking Bad, you can tell they love that character. Like the writers love that character, even though he's doing horrible things, he's going through, and the love of that character really shines through. Even though he's kind of a despicable human being, you still can't help but kind of love him a little. And I think, as opposed to, something where, I'm sure we've all read scripts where you're like, oh, this writer really looks down on these characters, really doesn't like these characters, is writing like, I hate these people. And I feel like that's going to be very hard to cast, something like that. And sometimes, just looking at it through an actor's perspective, look at the early stuff. You know what I mean? Like sometimes we found this, with, test screenings and stuff, often like the first scene or the first couple scenes, if there's a line that stands out a little too much in one direction or another, it could really color the whole experience of that character. Like if the first line of a character is complaining about something or something like that, they might be like, this person's a whiner. I don't want to be a whiner, and that may be the only complaint that character ever does in the entire season. But just be aware of like how they'll read it. They'll read their character specifically and to make sure, there's enough there.
Yeah. One other thing, I think the question we've gotten from so many actors when first submitting, early pilot scripts in this phase is about motivation. It's about their character's motivation. Like, why am I going to do this thing? And you get that question all the time, and you need to have a good answer for it. And the answer may truly be, I need you to get to the carnival so we can introduce this other character, and they can sniff that out so quickly if it doesn't feel like they're doing something that is motivated by story. If it's just kind of a convenient, place to put that actor in order to move story along in a kind of roundabout way, they can just sniff that out so clearly. And if you don't have a good answer for why the character is doing X, Y, or Z, that whole conversation starts to fall apart. And I think that's where, like you're saying, John, an actor saying, do I trust this showrunner? Do I trust this? Is this a safe place for me to, bring my best work? And if they feel like their character isn't properly motivated from every scene to the next scene, it starts to really unravel quickly. So that's maybe something to really look at too.
I think that comes down to honesty, that it's like you need to write a character with honesty and who can be honestly played, that you're not just moving them around like a pawn, but they get to be a full grounded human being with believable motives.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Totally. And, like when we were making a movie called No Escape with Owen Wilson, there's so many moments in that movie where his character had to make a decision and then do it. And Owen very rightfully was, always really keyed in on, why would I make this decision in this moment? Is this the right decision? Is this what I would really do? And we had to really kind of craft a lot of those moments to make sure he felt like it absolutely was what his character would do in that moment. And because that movie was all about like instinct in an emergency, in a crisis, and and every decision that character made throughout that entire movie was kind of like, would my instincts tell me to do this? And so we had a lot of those conversations in that movie, and I think it made it a lot better too, and really helped his performance.
And it really helped us going forward too,
Yeah.
to really, shore that stuff up. And, I think too, part of the reading the script and then having a discussion with the showrunners, like to understand the complexity of the character. Like, Joe Pickett, you could read, the script of it and be like, oh, he's a good guy. That's kind of boring. Like, and we like to say like, he's doing the right things, but for all the wrong reasons. He's doing the right things to prove he's not going to turn out like his father, to prove he's not, as damaged as he thinks he is. You know what I mean? Like, he's doing the right things for all these wrong reasons. And that gave us a lot of depth to talk about with actors, and get the wonderful Michael Dorman to sign on. But we, when we talked with him, like, we got into all that stuff, and we got really deep. We talked a little bit about this in the last episode, but like the idea of like just trying to connect, not trying to sell an actor on like, okay, we have, 20 minutes. We got to sell this guy on doing our show. More like, hey, we're going to connect with this human being. We're going to use this show as a reason to, get into some of the deeper stuff of life, and to to be almost an excuse to like talk about real stuff, talk about growing up with violence or alcoholism, talk about whatever whatever stuff you have in your life that drives you and gives you meaning in what you do, and to me that's the best version of those those meetings.
I really want to highlight the point you just made too, and like that's an element that you're particularly good at, John, is really getting into those conversations with actors as far as like their background and what, you can kind of quickly see what about, if they're having the conversation with you, there's something about the script they like, something about the character they like, and otherwise you wouldn't even be talking. And so kind of trying to figure out what from their life is kind of motivating that interest, and what about the character they identify with, and really trying to dig that out in these private conversations, and trying to find like, what elements of this character and what scenes are really, resonating for this person on a personal level, and trying to play more to that. But, I think asking all those questions, actors love, being vulnerable. That's what they do for a living. And they do like talking about their past and kind of opening up, most of them, especially if it's around a story like this, that they can kind of, work through some of their own stuff through a fictional character, is like kind of a, not something that not many people get to do. And so, but yeah, to that point, finding the personal, truly like specifically what the personal connection is.
I want to point out that you guys are talking about the actor meeting, right?
Yeah.
We didn't mention that. It's like, hey, you've got the script, it's gone out, somebody's read it. They're not like, yeah, sign me up. They're going to want to meet with you over Zoom or in a coffee shop or, and depending where you are, you're going to have your little favorite restaurants, your little favorite hotels where you like to meet, whatever. And then, or so often through Zoom now, and you're going to have that conversation. How long do they usually last?
It depends. Like, I feel like there's a spectrum of these meetings that exist, and some are like the actor read it, truly likes it, and wants to meet, and you typically get that, vibe, quickly. And then there's the actor whose agent said, hey, we like these guys, or we also represent these guys, just take the meeting, There's those too. And you can pretty quickly tell when that's the case as well. And people are polite and respectful. It's not like, if they're taking the meeting, they're not going to come in and, ask why they're here and who are you? And, typically don't get that, but but you can kind of tell how much they like the writing and the character pretty much right away. And if they do like it, then that meeting tends to last quite a while, maybe an hour, maybe two. And, but then other ones might be, 20 minutes, 30 minutes if they're just doing it because their agent told them they should.
Yeah.
And in that meeting, you're saying that actors like to get vulnerable. And it's so true. They like to talk about themselves and their backstory and compare it to the characters. And like, hey, I have this experience. The character has this, but you, as the showrunners, are meeting them there, right? Like it's sort of like you offer a vulnerability or a personal story, and then they come back with one. Like you prove that it's a safe place, and then it's going to be collaborative and fun because you also are sharing things from your.
Yeah. I think that's right. And what is your experience of them as an actor, and what in your mind makes them so perfect to play this character? I think that's an important thing to think about before the meeting, because sometimes they're like, why do you want me? And you're like, well, because you're amazing, and like that's not enough. You need to, like there's an element of Joe Pickett that does this that I think is really important, and that's something I've seen you do. And I don't know, there's the more you can make it personal, like they're the only choice in the world for you. And there's always a list. There's always several options. There's always, if this person says no, we're going to move on to this person. There's always some version of that. And it's, I think, genuine when we're in a meeting with someone and we're trying to, commit to them. In that moment, they are the only person in the world to do this.
Yeah.
And we have to think that way too. And so I don't think it's, disingenuous. I think it's very real.
Right. That list thing was such a shocker for me to be like, oh my God, you get this list. It's like that. It's full of names that usually, like, I don't know a lot of the names. Sometimes you have to look them up on things. Oh yeah, that person or whatever. But it's, when you're an actor, you think that the casting will just be like, I wrote this role for Melissa McCarthy and she's the only one who will do, and I'm going to get this to her and that's it. And it's like, no, nobody's even going to talk about who the right person is. First, they're going to talk about who's available.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Who is legally allowed to work in Canada? That's going to check below this right there. Who's going through a divorce and needs the money and is saying yes. Who hasn't seen their kids in 2 years and they're saying no? It's like, who's available? That's such a big part of it.
It's a huge part of it. And you're right.
It's never the first idea. You know what I mean? Just straight up. Like it's,
You have never gotten Meryl Streep on a list. She's never, Meryl Streep has
She's never even made a list. Yeah. She's off the top end of the list. Yeah. But when you get lucky though, it ends up being really the right person. We try to take a real Zen approach in this casting zone where it's never the first idea. Yeah. But it often ends up being like the absolute, like Mike, it's hard to imagine Joe Pickett being anyone but Michael Dorman. I mean, that is, it's hard to imagine, David Koresh being anyone but, Taylor Kitsch. He was just so perfect. Yeah. And then we did season 2 and we're like, we need a, young 20s version of this guy. And we found Kean Johnson, who was amazing. And you just hope that it ends up in that perfect space. And for us, it always does. We get a bunch of no's. Some people pass. You get really bummed out. You're like, oh, I don't know if anyone else on this list is as good as the, 2 guys who just said no. And then you end up, somehow upgrading or making it, not upgrading, but, choosing someone who's better for the role and who's feels more spiritually connected to the role. It's like dating. We like to say it's almost like dating. You might go on some good dates and then it not work out and you're bummed out about it. But ultimately those not working out leads you to the person that you're meant to be with. And I think the same is very true with casting.
You want to be with the person who really wants to be with you too.
Yeah, exactly.
You know what I mean?
The right person for the role is the person who wants the role. They're bringing that enthusiasm and passion to it. And it's not just there because, I want the role because my career is at a standstill and any job is a good. No, they really want this particular job, which reminds me of putting stuff in the pilot that makes an actor want to do something. Yes, there's like depth and breadth and good dialogue and all that, but there's also lots of little delicious treats, like maybe getting to sing a song or a great speech or a really unusual relationship or a great image, like being in your tighty whities in your RV, like a great moment. What will you guys speak to that?
Yeah, like a couple moments. You should have a couple moments that you're like, I bet the right actor is going to be like, oh, holy shit. Stacey's example of Walter White, he's doing his last will and testament in his tighty whities in the middle of the desert. I'm like, that's an awesome pilot moment for an actor. A very specific actor is going to want to do that, and it's the right actor. You know?
Good point.
That's right.
Bruce Willis probably wouldn't have wanted to do that.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, nothing stands out in a bad way. Nothing is going to give them the like, oh, I don't want to do something like that. He's makes a, misogynistic remark or, you know what I mean? Something like that in the pilot where you're like, oh, this guy, or, something that like, I don't know, gives you that bad feeling. And you want to have a couple moments that are great for the actor.
Although if you were writing an anti-hero, you might want to have that moment where, not the misogynistic moment, because, people sort of don't want to do that, but
Yeah.
the moment where you kill the dog, or the moment where you
Yeah.
shove a child off of a tower, or, you know what I mean? Something where you do something
Yeah.
bad.
Yeah. If that's a character you're writing, yeah,
Right.
For sure. Okay, and then let's move into, you got your actor, you have your green light. Now it's time to move into, script number 4, the fourth version of the script, which is the blueprint. You're greenlit, you're off to shoot your show, and now your script becomes a kind of working document. As you're going from the writer's room to the real world, you're going to start to notice a lot of things. Like maybe a writer said like, the cane corsos, in this scene, blah, blah, blah. And you're going
King
to have
Corso's a type of dog.
and the dog people are going to be like, oh, there's no cane corsos in Canada. Like, what do we do? And you're like, oh, that's just a random big dog. Like, they're like, how about Dobermans? So you're like, great. Like, there's a lot of that kind of stuff that, as you're going from the specificity of the writer's room to the real world, there's a negotiation between reality and, at the same time, like Nate Romanowski's gun in the book series is a very specific gun. And they're like, we don't have that in Canada. We're like, well, we need to find a way to get that in Canada because
Right.
it's that's an important detail. The specificity of what kind of tree is out front or what kind of dog, like that's just specificity. That doesn't necessarily track. And so there's a whole version of the script that goes through a revision in this zone too.
Yeah, you'll do many drafts in prep that are there'll be a lot of stars on your draft that are just changing specificity to match, because even if you have a conversation with your, animal handler and you've decided that it's not going to be a Cane Corso and it's going to be a Doberman, it still says Cane Corso in the script and people get confused. And so you'll have a million of those that are just, changes for reality. And as John said, it's helpful to remember, what's important and what's not in that zone.
One of the things that surprised me that's helpful to do at this stage is listing all the characters right up front in a thing. Here's the thing. I would say, you got your slug line, interior, men's bathroom, whatever. I don't know why I thought of that. So you got your slug line. And normally, if I'm writing a script, like I don't want to put that boring stuff up front. I want to just do like a list of the characters that are there. That's, I want to make it sound of like enticing and interesting. And maybe we drop in with like, there's one little action, then we drop into some fun dialogue, and then I kind of pepper the characters throughout. Maybe I don't even mention them, just like the family is there or whatever, instead of listing them. But no, you really need to just go ahead and make it a little bit boring, but extremely clear by putting all the characters who are in that scene in the first, paragraph or so.
Because your audience is no longer the execs that you want to greenlight or the actor that you're trying to cast. Your audience now is your crew, and and everyone needs to know who's in every scene, know what details, what props need to be there, what don't. Your audience is specifically your crew now, and that changes things.
For example, if you want your golden retriever in the scene, you got to mention the dog.
Yeah.
It's not, you can't just be like, it's the house. The dog's always available to me to be there. Maybe I want a moment where the camera kisses the dog for a second. It's like, well, then even though writing the golden retriever there, is not very fun in the script, it's kind of dull to read. If you want them to show up on that day, or, if you want the 3 of them to show up on that day, you got to.
And a good AD at some point during, your meetings in your page turns will say, do you want the dog there or not? It'll kind of clarify those things, but it's better if you can just do that yourself. And you may not get the opportunity to clarify and then be shooting and being like, where's the dog? And like, the dog's not in the scene. We're like, oh, but I thought the dog was always in the house. Exactly.
We had something like that once, like where there's like 5 characters in this house, and as we crossed from one side of the room to the other, they were slugged differently, and there were different days that we shot them. And one of the, what I thought was one of the key characters was listed in one side of the room, but not the other. So as we cross the room, that character, is just kind of gone. And I was like, wait, but where's the character? And it's like, well, she's not listed in the script. And so it's like literally like as characters move from one room to the next, you have to be like this person, this person, this person, this person, this person, cross to the next room.
Yeah.
This person, this person, this person, this person, like sit at the table. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it kind of reads like it's like, and it's helpful to have good writers around you who can kind of make that sit in, decently so it doesn't totally destroy the read.
Right. You don't literally list them. It can be like as Missy sips her wine, Joe gives her the side eye. It's not like you just say Missy, Joe, Lucy, Sheridan, eat breakfast.
Totally. But you can,
But you can.
and it's important, to mention, because now you're creating a blueprint. Now people will have the things that are in your script there in that scene, but if it's not mentioned in the script and you're like, oh, where is this character's car? They're like, well, the car isn't mentioned in the script, so we didn't have the car here today. And those things are just, it becomes a very technical thing, but an important, your script almost becomes a list of to-do items and things to be delivered.
Yeah. It's just a list of props and cars.
It's
That's it.
inventory. It's just inventory at this point.
Yeah.
Totally. And that it is what it is.
And that's good because that's how it's actually happening.
Well, and it's up to you to know which is which. Drew and I did a movie and we had this beautiful opening written that or we thought that was like on this like royal yacht and then we were shooting this in Thailand and they're like, we're landlocked. There's no boats. There's no boats within, 1,000 miles of here.
We were in northern Thailand, in case you're wondering how this is possibly landlocked. But yes, we were in the north side of Thailand. So.
Yeah. And they're like, we can go to Bangkok to, but nothing like what you're describing exists here in Thailand. Like, it's not going to be anything like this. And then we said, okay, well, what kind of feeling? You get the feeling we're going for with this. And they found us like this beautiful kind of palace in the mountains. And it was not far away from us. It was so much better than anything we would have thought of. And that's part of the upside of this phase is there will be things that you can't find that, you really wanted. Mm-hmm. And often you will find something so much better and so much more specific. And so Drew and I had one scene in that same movie, set in a temple. And then we were out walking one day and we found this terracotta garden. We're like, this is so much more specific and more interesting than a temple. Let's build the scene into this. Cause and it was like this, I don't know, there's a way to really elevate the specificity by embracing the world you find yourself in versus trying to force the world to bend to the script.
Yeah.
Find what's beautiful about the world and bring your script to it.
And using that example, it was, set in a Buddhist temple and our local, Thai line producers saying they'll never, no Buddhist temple. This was really kind of, they would consider it sacrilegious to put the scene in a Buddhist temple, so they're never going to say yes, and you should just think of something else.
I forgot about that.
And we kept trying to push it and be like, okay, well, we can, maybe we build that. Maybe we build the interior, one room of a Buddhist temple. We really like that idea. It should feel like the kind of thing that shouldn't be happening in a temple. That's kind of the point. And we really pushed against that resistance a lot until we stumbled upon the place you're mentioning, John, that terracotta garden, where oh, it could be here, and it's it's like a temple, but it's open air, and it had so many other things that we loved. And we realized we've been pushing this boulder up the hill for all of pre-production, trying to make this work in a Buddhist temple, even being willing to build our own Buddhist temple when we realized there's a better alternative.
Yeah.
At this point in the process, the writer becomes a bit of a list maker. Do you know what I mean? What you're just describing is so cool. It's collaborative people going, oh, we've got this problem. We open our eyes, we look around, we find a better location. Oh, it's this beautiful terracotta thing. Great. That decision has been made. Awesome. But this is where the writer has to actually put that into the script. And in TV, that's a very regimented thing. So it might have been the director and the AD and the location scout who came up with that idea, right? But the writer might not have had anything to do with it. But only a writer is allowed to open up the script and stick it in. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it's at this point in the process, things get pretty stressful, especially if you're making changes for something you're shooting soon. You definitely get we need those pages soon. We when can we see those pages? When are we getting those pages? And they're not talking about a beautiful speech or an incredible moment. They're literally like, when can we get the pages that say Doberman Pinscher instead of Cane Corso, that say Valley instead of Town, that say Apple Orchard instead of, I don't know, Honeysuckle Orchard. Is there such a thing? I'm just making shit up. That say, like somebody has to put those things in. Anyway, I'm only highlighting that because it's a very weird moment in the production when you realize you've sort of been this writer on this kind of fancy plane of like, I think lovely thoughts and then I type them up. And now it's like, no, fuck, you're in charge of the grocery list.
Yeah.
and you're just scratching off apple and writing in broccoli. And yet you've never been more important to everyone than scratching off apple and writing in broccoli. Everybody, you got 100 people going like, when can we get the list that says broccoli?
And all those hours you spent like looking for the perfect dog for the scene, and you're like, oh, you don't have the dog, you just throw that out. You just throw that in the garbage. Like, all right, it's gone. What do you have?
Oh my God, same with names. I love a lot of writers who I love choosing names. You lovingly choose the name. The name's so great. The name for the business, or the name for the cemetery, or the name for the character. And then what are they called?
Clearances.
Clearances. And then
Clearance comes back and says, nope. How about these four?
Sends you a list of all the stuff you're not allowed to say, which is, by the way, every name in the whole world. You're not allowed to call anything.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah. I would just one kind of separate point that you were touching on, Stacey, in this zone that I find really important that I wouldn't have known until we, did our first couple shows is you're not only, we've talked a lot about setting up your characters, you're kind of all your leads in your pilot, and but you're also setting up your locations of your show in your pilot. Mm-hmm. And I think that becomes abundantly clear when you get into pre-production that, if you look at, just using Joe Pickett, for example, like the Pickett house. Okay, yes, we know we're going to spend a lot of time at that house. The Stockman's bar. Okay, that's a definite location we're going to spend a lot of time at. The locations that you write that are one-offs will very quickly become very apparent, and you just can't. It's not that you can't do a one-off location; you just can't do it a lot. I think up top, so you should be looking at your pilot script as trying to set up key locations, because I think in the writer's room there's a tendency to want to write every scene in a new cool place and keep it fresh and keep it different and interesting, where that doesn't work when it comes to actually then scheduling the show. And when you have 16 days to shoot 2 episodes, you need that kind of continuity of locations, and you need locations to be more than one scene, even if it's not for a couple more episodes. You just it really helps a ton to kind of consolidate the writing into reusable locations, where I think that's kind of a moment of reckoning that we all have in prepping the first block, and the line producer will say, okay, this spot, do we ever go back there? Nope. Okay, figure it out, put it somewhere else. And I think that's really helpful. You don't want a company move for a one-page scene to its own location is really a killer.
It's also your chance to get creative and to think in a fresh way about what those permanent locations are going to be. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? So it's not just crossing things off the list. It's also thinking, okay, can I use a location over and over that's a really interesting, like I went to Carnegie Mellon and I just read the people who were the production designers for Friends also went there. They just won an award. Anyway, I just read this story. I thought it was so interesting, where they were saying this guy not only came up with the coffee shop and the couch, but he also was pushing really hard to show the hallway between the 2 apartments. And I never thought of that. I'm like, nobody ever does the hallway between apartments.
And it's so key in that show. Yeah.
In Friends, they're constantly in the hallway between those 2 apartments. I bet in the first zillion iterations of the pilot, it was just the guy's apartment, the girl's apartment, the coffee shop. Right. Guys, girls, coffee shop. Yeah. And to be creative enough to go, hey, let's do that in between space and let's use it all the time.
Yeah.
I think that's probably smart. More for like a 3-camera show than the kind of shows we do. But even so, you can do, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, no, that's a great example. And that's perfect, like New York living. It is the hallway where you run into each other. Like that is such a key location. But I think, this kind of fewer locations, more work in each location kind of mentality is a specifically TV thing. So if you're coming from features and, into TV, I think this is one of the things that's been pounded into our heads of just how critical it is when designing a season of television, limiting the number of locations and doing more at each place. And then you can create room for that one great location you just go to one time for, a great 4-page scene, and you go to the top of the mountain and you only make your crew go up there for one day, and everyone complains about it, but it looks great. And you can create space to do that if you've properly consolidated other scenes into the same places.
I personally like that more too. Like, I have to say, if say it's a big budget thing, I watched something really big budget recently in the pilot, and there's too many locations. I have no attachment to them.
Yeah.
So say, for example, you're going to have the big cocktail party that's very fancy and something exciting happens. Yeah, you could have that at some benefactor's house of a minor character who's going to say one line and you never see again. Or couldn't you just put it at the main character's house? They're rich too,
Yeah, and things about their house says something about that character that's way more important than the distant,
it's full of meaning.
Yeah, it's full of meaning, exactly.
When familiarity is, it's like Friends, your example of Friends, like there's 3 sets and you become emotionally attached to all 3 of those, like on a pretty deep level. And, when they start, in future seasons going into like 5 or 6 different apartments, you're like, I don't like these places. Like, I want to go back to the places I know and love. And I feel like, so many, TV it used to be like, one set, it's Cheers, it's the one bar, and that's the one location.
Yeah.
And there's something beautiful about that familiarity. One thing I want to just talk about real quick before moving into the shootable battle plan. In the blueprint phase, one of the things I find really interesting is as you bring your script into, production, and you suddenly have people who are like real experts on things. Like your armorer is going to know more about guns, I'll speak for myself. The armorer knows more about guns than I do, and knows more about hunting than I do. And we're, if we're doing a game warden show, the animal handlers know more about the behavior patterns of these animals. They'll be like, oh, a horse would never do this. You know what I mean? And as a writer, you could come into those like, how dare you? I did all the research. I know everything. Like, or you can come at it like and listen to them and use, harness their knowledge. Like use the breadth of knowledge of people who are experts, each one in their own field. And our production designer is like, how you can tell a house has been in a location for years and years is it has old growth trees around it. And so we looked for zones in old growth trees where we could build a house, because it's the windbreak around the house. And it feels like that house has been there for hundreds of years. Like we would have never come up with that. I don't know that. But, our production designer knew that. And our, props department, they knew a lot about hunting. They hunt and I don't, and I never have. And so I kind of needed like, oh, that doesn't work. That's not how you do this. Like, oh no, it's, bad form to do this. And that like, and we were able to use those experts, to rebuild sequences to be more realistic to the, to the world, and to give it more specificity in many ways. And in a way that really embraces knowledge that we just frankly didn't have. Jumping in. So the final script is the shootable battle plan, and some of the locations, some of the culling down locations down to, shootable locations. That's a big part of this.
Yeah. Mentioning locations in the previous blueprint might have jumped the gun a little bit. Some of that's kind of, in the gray area between blueprint and shootable battle plan, but it's all kind of a continuous phase now of getting from your, script you sold to what's shootable. And, but yeah, 100%. So culling locations is a big one. Too many speaking characters is another big one that we run into a lot. And we tend to just write way too many characters. And then you look at, ultimately you get a grid of like, okay, how many, episodes per character? Like we were, in every show, I feel like we're just like millions of dollars over the mark on cast budget when we break it down for the first time. We're like, oh God, we gotta, and that's been frankly, some of the bigger like writing emergencies we've been in pre-production have been related to this one detail of too many speaking characters, not consolidating enough material within your leads, that kind of idea. So it's something
I have a good anecdote for that.
Uh-huh.
Okay, I'm going to use the R word because it was part of the script. But in Waco season 1, it ultimately got cut, and our son actually played young David Koresh, young Vernon Howell. So our son was cast in the role, and he, Vernon Howell, David Koresh in real life was bullied as a child, and he had learning disabilities that made people tease him. Anyway, so in this scene, it's supposed to be that he's on the ground as a little child, a little 8-year-old, and lots of mean boys have circled him, and they're kicking him over and over and yelling things at him, and all the kids are going, Mr. because that's what they called him.
Yeah.
So that's the R word. Sorry about that. But that's from life. Anyway, then it comes down to shoot it. And we've got our son is on the ground and we've got all the boys to circle him. And the AD pops out and goes, oh, you can only afford to have one person talk. Like, what? So instead, it can no longer be all the little boys chanting it, because then you'd have to pay all the little boys. If they don't chant it, you pay them $100. If they do chant it, you pay them like $1,500 or something. Like, what? So then we got one kid just kicking him over and over, going, Mister, and nobody else is joining in, and that looked terrible.
Yeah.
And it all got cut. I mean, it got cut for other reasons, but you know what I mean. That's an example of, you should probably know ahead of time.
Yeah, that's where you tighten up and shoot the close-up of the kid on the ground and just feet kicking him, depend on loop group, and hope for the best,
Yeah.
Well, and just to break this point down, so if somebody speaks, if someone says even, yup, you're paying them like SAG minimum, like speaking role fee, which is, $1,500 or $1,000, something. And if somebody just like nods, you pay them like $100, you pay them an extra, as an extra. And the difference in that, and, you don't pay an extra residuals, but you do pay an actor residuals. And so it's like all the characters who just say, or like, Joe Pickett, you know what I mean? Like all that, like you go through the script and you realize that there's a whole bunch of people in our scripts, at least, that say yes, or hello, or, you know what I mean? Just like one word. And you're like, oh, those add up. And, that's part of what's tallied as, cost overruns and stuff. And part of it is like, and to Drew's point, like, if you're not showing their face, you can have someone in loop group later say the line you want. Like if it's the other end of a phone call, you can see someone pick up the phone and then you can cut to the other side and maybe that one might be on the line. But you can have somebody
are we allowed
off camera.
to do these things or these?
Yeah. I mean, you can have someone off camera speaking, and you can do that with your loop group, which is like an, post-production group of actors who come in and do like supplemental acting for smaller, for background characters and stuff like that. And that's a little workaround if you need to do something like that. But trying to have the least number of people saying one or two words, because that just bleeds you to do that.
That's true. And then when you're lead cast, you'll get into that, talking about your top, 7 maybe of your leads. If you have one of those characters in an episode to say one line, that's another thing that will get, flagged at some point of like, oh, hey, we're paying this actor $100,000 an episode, and she shows up, to say one line in episode 7. It's $100,000 line. And, so you'll get challenged on that too. And in the writer's room, you don't think about it. You're like, oh, it's one of our leads. They'll be there all the time. Well, and you don't really clock like, oh, this is her only line in this whole episode. But at some point in pre-production, you do have to do that analysis, and you do have to make some concessions, and you do have to think, okay, and sometimes you've already made the deal with the actor for 8 out of 10 episodes. And now you're like, oh God, some of that money wasn't our best money spent. And the sooner you're thinking about that, the better. And the more money you can save your show for other things.
And, in this zone too, in the shootable battle plan, there's going to be too many pages. There's going to be too many locations. The AD and the director who are directing it are going to be like, this is an impossible script. Like you can't do it. And it's not like people are trying to crush your dreams and stuff. It's just always how it is in our experience. I mean, maybe we just write too many locations, but my sense is that it's always that way. And finding creative ways of looking at the economy of the script, from a, both story and a logistical kind of point of view, and trying to find like, hey, I have 2 lines in this one-off location. Can I pull those lines into like maybe a second scene at the location we were just at? You know what I mean? And maybe we cut away to something, come back, and we do this little bitty scene in the same location. Or is there a way I could, just simplify things to make it more shootable? And I think to Drew's point earlier about, less locations, like that just makes it more shootable. It makes it easier on the actors, on the AD, on, moving production, on the directors' days. The more you can do to help the director have a shootable day, the better it's going to be for you. And the more time they'll have to like get stuff right versus like running from location to location. So all those things, like I'd say our season 1 of Waco was an example of like, we're like, and part of it was we were directing a bunch and stuff, but because we didn't want to thin out the script pages, we ended up with 20, 30 minutes on the cutting room floor of every episode that we shot and that we struggled to get shot, you know what I mean? And all that work ended up being we could have thinned out those scripts ahead of time and spent less time running around shooting stuff. You know what I mean? And
Waco season 1 was that situation where we had never done TV before, so we were inexperienced. The studio had never really done TV before, so they were inexperienced. And the network had done like a lot of reality stuff, so they were inexperienced. I think, you end up with 20 minutes on the cutting room floor per episode because every layer of that team was kind of inexperienced in TV. And and it hurts to have to find ways to cut that much material out. I think we finally learned our pacing, all the way, into Pickett season 2, I think is where we finally kind of found our sweet spot of like page number, how we're shooting, what we're shooting to versus what the cuts look like lengthwise. And, there's usually a range of, time. Some networks have a very specific time you have to hit, but a lot of them have, streamers now have a range of like, it can't be shorter than this, it can't be longer than that. It's usually, a good 5-minute kind of delta between the minimum and the maximum. And that's like a nice way to kind of feel like what length the episode really wants to be. And, but yeah, it took us a while. We were definitely like overstuffing the suitcase every time.
Yeah.
And we had to compromise in other ways to get all that material shot. And, yeah.
Yeah. And I'll say season 1 of Pickett, for example, there was that range. There was like a 10-minute range. It was 45 to 60 minutes was the range. So 15-minute range. And season 1 of Pickett, we were at the very top end of that range, just bumping the top end of that range the entire season. Season 2, we were bumping the bottom edge of that range because we're like, we're exerting so much more time, effort, energy, resources to cram an extra 10 minutes of content into every episode. It's kind of more fun. The pacing feels better if we stay on the lower end of that. And it's just, people are less exhausted. Like, you know what I mean? You're not, grinding out. And, we shot season 2 for less money and less time, than season 1. And and I feel like the episodes are the better for it.
Yeah. And I hate to sound too much like a, network executive here, but like the single most important thing for your show, if you want a season 2 or a season 3, is that when audiences watch an episode, that they click next episode. They still have some attention span and some gas in the tank to move on to another episode. And if you're riding, 60 minutes per episode, they're far less likely to watch a second episode in the same sitting as a 45-minute episode. And that's just, that's reality. And, and they do really pay attention to those kind of metrics. They can see that and they can measure that. And that's like maybe the most important metric for them is like bingeability in today's TV world anyway. And, as tempting as it is to want to cram all the greatest ideas and, hit the high end of that, that time episodic, length, I think it's maybe a mistake.
I know a lot of adults don't have a bedtime, but a lot of adults do. They got to wake up at 6. They got kids that got to go to school. They have to go to work,
Yeah.
So I have to say, when I have a 45-minute episode, we'll finish one and I'll be like, oh, let's do another. We can do another.
Yeah.
But if it's an hour,
No,
you make
you
that.
won't.
You're like, no, it's bedtime.
Yeah,
We gotta, you
it's
know?
true.
Yeah.
That's the difference.
You can lie
Yeah.
to yourself
Yeah.
a lot easier.
Totally.
Yeah.
with
and
45 minutes.
somewhere out there's somebody analyzing that data, deciding whether or not to give that show another season.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like the click next and finish, if you finish a season versus if you just watch 2 episodes and you're done, like they're tracking that. I've been told that is one of the primary metrics that some streamers use to determine whether or not to greenlight a future seasons, is like what percentage of people actually finish the season.
Yeah, it's true. Make it easy. Make it easy for them to finish. And some of that's just length of time.
Is this thing on? Is this thing on?
So, just to recap, like there's kind of these 5 islands that your script has to go through just to get shot, and then there's, all the revisions you'll do in post and stuff like that. But this is kind of a broad overview of the differences in the focus and objective, and where you're like, all you need to do is get through that next phase and get to the next stage. You don't have to worry about like, hey, if I cram all this stuff into the pilot, then it's going to be too much stuff. Like you can focus on getting it, sold, and then focus on getting it greenlit, and then and those objectives are differently, and it's worth thinking about them in those terms.
And just always remember your pilot is just a working document that's never truly done until you've shot it. And I think that's the key switch for us, is like, oh no, we wrote it. It's good. It's ready to go. No, it's never ready to go until you've shot the entire thing, basically.
So to recap it, it's 1, sell it. 2, get that green light. 3, lure some awesome actors. 4, unify the crew to be like, what are we making here? 5, shoot the thing. And then it is just going to become a historical document, because once it's all edited down, it's going to look like something else.
Yeah, it's true.
Yeah. And then you'll do a whole nother rewrite, on set, and then a whole nother rewrite in post.
Yeah.
And we'll get into that in some other future day. But if you like our show, please consider taking a moment to subscribe and rate us wherever you get your podcasts, and maybe even tell a friend. That all really helps us find our audience. Thank you. We appreciate it.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.